Hello, and welcome to Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, the Sharjah Biennial 16 edition, sponsored by the Sharjah Art Foundation.
I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu.
The Sharjah Art Foundation is an advocate, catalyst, and producer of contemporary art within the Emirate of Sharjah and the surrounding region. In dialogue with the international arts community, the foundation advances an experimental and wide-ranging programmatic model that supports the production and presentation of contemporary art, preserves and celebrates the distinct culture of the region, and encourages a shared understanding of the transformational role of art. Organized by the foundation, Sharjah Biennial's 16th edition, SB16, convenes under the title To Carry, a multivocal and open-ended proposition, exploring the ever-expanding questions of what it means to carry and how to carry it. SB16 is an invitation to encounter the different formations and positions of the 5 curators, as well as the constellation of resonances they have gathered. Curated by Aliyah Swastika, Amal Khalaf, Megan Tamati Quinnell, Natasha Jin, and Zainab Oz, the biennial unveiled more than 650 works by nearly 200 participants, including more than 200 new commissions. The biennial was launched on February 6, 2025, and will continue through June 15, 2025. During this exclusive capsule season, I'll engage in dialogue and discourse with artists participating in the Sharjah Biennial who are presenting new commissions. Throughout the series, you'll hear from artists across the globe, from Australia and Kenya to London and Nigeria and more. You'll hear us discuss a wide range of topics, from each artist's practice to their reflections on our society and the questions they investigate through their work. Please join me as I share these dynamic conversations with you, exploring the ins and outs and inner worlds of artists participating in the Sharjah Biennial with their newly commissioned works. Let's go! On this episode, I'm joined by Hugh Hayden as we discuss his newly commissioned work presented for the 16th edition of the Sharjah Biennial, elucidated through the curatorial theme To Carry, asking questions such as what does it mean to carry a home, a history, a language, a legacy, and a lineage. Hugh Hayden was born in Dallas, Texas in 1983 and lives and works in New York City. He holds an MFA from Columbia University and a Bachelor of Architecture from Cornell University. Hugh Hayden's practice considers the anthropomorphization of the natural world as a visceral lens for exploring the human condition. Hayden transforms familiar objects through a process of selection, carving, and juxtaposing to challenge our perceptions of ourselves, others, and the environment. Raised in Texas and trained as an architect, his work arises from a deep connection to nature and its organic materials. Hayden utilizes wood as his primary medium, frequently loaded with multi-layered histories in their origin, including objects as varied as discarded trunks, rare indigenous timbers, Christmas trees, or souvenir African sculptures. In this episode, Hugh reflects on his observations on cultural diversity and geographical difference, comparing the U.S.'s peripheral status to the vibrant multicultural hub of Sharjah and the UAE, while emphasizing adaptability and cultural engagement. The discussion delves into how different environments influence his work. Let's dive into my next episode with Hugh Hayden. This episode was recorded on site, and this was a moment when Hugh and I sat down for a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about his newly commissioned work presented in the Sharjah Biennial 16. We're here at the opening of the Sharjah Biennial 16, and Hugh Hayden, you are presenting a new work, a newly commissioned work. And as we're at the opening and experiencing all of the tours and moving around with folks, what are some of the, if any, what are some of the surprising moments that you've had thus far at the opening? Anything particularly striking or surprising to you?
Thanks for having me, Sade. And I would say, though, probably one of the most apparent things to me, just being here in the region, like even when I came first for a site visit last year, is how on the periphery the U.S. is. For me, being born and raised in the U.S., that the U.S. is so much on the periphery, both geographically, literally, and physically, so that Sharjah, the Dubai, and the Emirates is this hub for a whole nother part of the world that I'm so not familiar with, like Africa, Southeast Asia, and parts of Europe that aren't so New York and London centric, which has been really interesting. And that's reflected in the people and in the artworks and the artists that are here, which I find super interesting. It's like you're not at Art Basel, you're not at the Whitney Biennial. It's a much broader, expansive, and diverse range of people.
Beautiful. I love that reflection because I've asked a few people about the surprises of this experience, and everyone has such unique reflections. But I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into the idea of how being in a different place can impact you and how it can impact your work, or how it can impact how you're thinking about your work in the context of the place that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
What was the research process for you like when you were here you said you had a site visit?
I had a site visit. It was mainly, for me, I'm a sculptor, and it's important that the work, I'm making the work for whatever reasons that are driving it, but as a former architect, I always do think about where my work is going to be exhibited and how that context and the space and the cultural history can influence the interpretation of it. And so, yeah, it was picking the best site for the piece, or if the site was given, how could I best understand it to get the most out of it, to heighten the experience of the artworks, and then meeting the people and trying to find out about the culture as well. But to some degree, the work is embedded in my own interests and what personal history, and they're based off of existing bodies of work. But at the same time, I'm not trying to reappropriate it here or dictate some U.S. ideal here. I think the actual artworks I'm showing are more universal. Well, of course, I did make them, and they had initial reasons I made them, but I think in this they can have a broader, more expansive context beyond even what the curator wrote on the wall label.
Definitely, definitely. And for folks listening in who are tuning into the episode but may or may not have the opportunity to come to Sharjah and see the newly commissioned work that you've created for the biennial, can you briefly describe what folks are going to see when they enter the space where your new work is?
Yes, so I have two sites, and the first site is in town in a historic house, a courtyard that's part of the foundation. And there I have, in the Beit Galoum, which is the name of the courtyard, I have you enter on this sort of court of, first you see this sort of the side of a soccer goal the net is completely braided out of a blonde hair. So it's a soccer goal, but at the ends you can see that it's loose hair blowing in the wind. Also, opposite the soccer goal is a basketball goal that's freestanding coming out of the ground with a long net that is braided out of a black hair. And sort of the two goals are facing each other as this sort of game. And that can mean different things to different people. After seeing them installed, though, it was definitely one of the things I became interested in as a more interesting experience would be an actual performance of a game between sort of one side is the basketball team, the other side is the soccer team, using the same ball, one using their hands, one using their feet to try to score a goal on the other. And so this sort of notion of language and translation, which isn't actually even using the mouth, but is more about sports and competition, they're fighting. I actually think that's the most interesting thing that could happen. And so now I'm working with Natasha, the curator, to figure out a way that we could stage that at some point while the exhibition is still up. Because I think while the works can exist as these objects that are blowing in the wind and as individual artworks, but I think that would be the most interesting way of taking advantage of the exhibition opportunity and something that I think makes them both works much more complex. But also in that space, there are two in the back alcoves of the courtyard. There are two other works that are these basketball goals that have their nets woven out of large scale rattan. So like a rattan is normally used what a basket is woven from, but they're woven into these sort of vase-like two-legged figures that are reclining like a odalisque. And then out in the desert at the El Madam, which is also called the Buried Ghost Village, is this housing development, like a neighborhood that was built at some point and abandoned. And so the desert where this is constructed about an hour outside of town, the desert has taken over the village. Like the sand, anything placed in the desert becomes an object that sand builds up upon. And so the desert has covered these homes. But in this community, opposite the local mosque, we've installed a classroom of school desks that were originally installed at Madison Square Park. But we're out in the desert. We've installed this classroom that is of 20 school desks that have tree branches growing out of them. Obviously, this is a desert where it's being installed. There actually are some trees and native vegetation, but they're more precious here. And these desks, though, have no leaves or whatever growing on the branches, but they're facing you as you enter the village. And eventually they'll be covered in sand, like the desks first, and eventually maybe you'll only see the branches sticking out of the ground, not knowing what's below them. And so that was this sort of installation that was first realized in the middle of New York City, that there were 100 desks. We had in a totally different environment and climate where they were covered in snow and rain at different points of the year. And they traveled around the U.S., so they've gotten all this age from all the different sites they've been in. And now they're installed in this totally different environment where maybe their aging will be arrested in a certain way and they evolve in a new way, and color might change. I'm really not exactly sure, but it's also just exciting to let them take on a new context and they take on a different meaning in the desert. And they're permanently installed.
Really?
Yeah, because they'll get covered by the desert.
Incredible.
And also wood is ephemeral. So it's not like some bronze sculpture with a paint job that we're going to try to every 20 years recoat and repaint. But yeah, they're permanently installed in the desert with an idea that they'll get covered in sand. It will become a tomb.
Wow.
And that, because they're not, wood is an ephemeral material, but I also don't know exactly how in this new condition, which is like different from what I know in the U.S., different climate where it's drier and more arid and the sand and the sun, that they might not age as quickly, and then it might be preserved. I don't know.
Yeah, it remains to be seen.
Yeah.
And as the Biennale unfolds over the next couple of months, one will see what that looks like.
Yeah, I don't even know how fast, though. It might be quite quickly, but it might take years.
Yeah, that's a really interesting reflection. It's cool to think about what it would be like to go back to that desert, which we've both been to, and see what has happened with your work and how the environment has changed it. But before we hop, I want to go back to something you said earlier about America being so much on the periphery here. And as a person, a Black male person living in America and having been born and raised in that environment, can you speak a little bit more deeply about maybe what is it like for you to be here and in a place where people are thinking about the U.S. from so far away that it's almost not even really front of people's minds?
I'm not so sure if it's not in the front of their people's minds because they're closer to they're in the Middle East. But I haven't talked politically that much with people here, but also people are a little more quiet, or at least so I am not exactly sure the true perspective of being an American here, and also sort of the context of how I'm meeting people. So I can't say I have a super genuine notion of how. On the previous trip, though, it wasn't like the biennial being a lot of people around, so I had a relatively more authentic experience. It was also at a time when tourists don't come here because it was in the heat of the summer. There were just more local people. And I'm really into exploring a city for its architecture, its food, and just like understanding how people live here. And so as much as I can, and I've spent some time in Dubai, but a little bit is more about consumption and capitalism and if you could pay for it. But also I would say from my external experience, this place is very much a melting pot of but there's different ingredients than you would find in New York City. Like in terms of like a stew in New York is potatoes and steak and onions and carrots and celery. Here there's like different things that grow in the region. And so again, it's this cultural hub of a different part of the world with the places that are served by short direct flights bring a whole like different amalgamation of cultures here. So I think it's really vibrant and different than from most of the places I've traveled. And like you actually do see a lot of people of African descent, different parts of Africa. So it's really exciting just like finding out. To me, it's diverse because it's more beyond what I know in the US. So it's, and the density of people is the right word, but you're meeting a lot of people from places that are very far away from the US but are very close to here. So I know it's interesting. It's a much more, other parts of the world are much closer here. And so it is a much more rich experience. This area is a hub. So it like just how, Queens might feel more diverse than Dallas. London might feel more multicultural than New York. And then here feels more something different altogether than London. But it's interesting.
I want to give a big thank you and a big shout out to Hugh for joining me on the show. Thank you for tuning in to this capsule season of Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, the Sharjah Biennial 16 edition, sponsored by the Sharjah Art Foundation. These episodes were recorded both on site and remotely during the opening week and after the opening of the 16th edition of the Sharjah Biennial. During the episodes, you will hear the sights and sounds of the local environment, from the various sites across the Emirate of Sharjah where the biennial takes place. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu, and I'll see you next time. Stay tuned for my next episode. As always, stay motivated, stay inspired, and stay up. Peace and love to all.